and get comfortable. Hello, everybody. So this week, some of the things that I talked about are, I'm freaked out by squirrels. Is anyone else with me? Can I get an amen? They sit there on the branch and they just stare at my dog and I. And I'm like, come on, Akila, come on. They freak me out. That's one thought that came to my mind this week. Another thought was that I just bought a tub of chocolate-covered raisins, dark chocolate, because to me that's the only kind of chocolate you should be eating. That wasn't a good idea, because while I eat chocolate every day, and sometimes multiple times a day, chocolate-covered raisins is something you can pick up by the handful and not stop. So those are my two very deep thoughts for the week. However, there's more. I was just scrolling in some of the other groups. I was scrolling through some Facebook pages. One, because I wanted to see if I could find chatter about the new Texas abortion law, which I don't want to get into too much. I just wanted to see what the talk was and to just read up about it. I didn't have enough time to dig deep enough to really find conversations, but I did see a post by somebody saying that they were scared of nicotine exposure, cigarette exposure in newborns. And if you do research, there is some concern. And if you're not open to cigarette smoking on a daily basis, you very likely will not adopt. It is that prevalent. It is that prevalent. I'd say probably more racially in white women, just because white women are typically, there's more drug exposure in general or substance exposure in general than African American. I'm just putting it out there. I tell everybody you have to be open to cigarettes and marijuana when you are going into this adoption process. So if that person who posted it is watching, then there you have it. I like to keep it real. I think if you are starting the adoption process, I think it's really important to understand substance exposure in adoption. That kind of leads me into this month's theme, which is trauma and adoption. And when I thought about this month's theme, trauma, I think about it in a lot of ways. I think there is trauma that so many of you, so many hopeful adoptive parents have experienced prior to landing in adoption as your choice to build your family. There is obviously trauma by the birth moms making such a decision and, placing their baby with somebody else. There is trauma with the adoptee. And then there is the trauma that all people in the adoption constellation have to work through in their lives at various times. In our email today that went out, if you want to get on our email list, just let me know and we'll get you on there. But on our weekly email today, we found an amazing adoptee who blogs and works with adoptees and hopeful parents around trauma and recommended 5 awesome books around that subject. I happen to be reading one right now called The Primal Wound. It's kind of one of those Bibles of adoption. It's not, it was written a long time ago, but it's still very, very relevant. It was written by Nancy Verrier. And actually, I think there is a podcast right now that I started listening to. And every week there are 2 adoptees and they go through a different chapter from The Primal Wound, which is really interesting. But I thought I would read a part, so I don't really plan, but right before I came on, I was like, oh, what can I read from this book? So I'm at the part right now. It's divided into a lot of sections. And at the beginning, I got to tell you, I started reading and I'm like, I don't know if I buy into all this. And this is me. I have a 10-year-old son. I've been in this industry for 8 years. And I've learned a whole lot. And I started reading this thinking, yes, and probably that's fair. I'm reading it saying, yes, and this could be any child. And it wasn't until I really started getting into the book, and it is not a fast read. Like it's heavy stuff. But it wasn't until I got really deeper into the book where I was like, okay. And I was seeing a lot of the things in my son or in other experiences that I had that I'm like, okay, you know what, this is more common than not. Some of the things that she talks about. The book is divided up into four parts. The first part is the wound, then the manifestations, how it manifests, like so what happened, how it manifests in their behavior, in our kids' behaviors, the healing, which is the part I'm in now. Thank God, I thought I'd never get there. I'm like, okay, so now what do we do with all this information? So that's the part I'm in now. And then conclusions. I'm in the healing part. And I just wanted to talk, I thought this was really interesting because she's talking now about how and how to talk to your children at different developmental stages in their lives. And she breaks it down by ages. And again, this is all a generalization. You know your child the best. But I think this is interesting, so I'll read some of it. And she said, while it's important to talk about adoption from an early age, it's equally important to remember that intellectually, adoption is an adult complex concept, which the child will not understand for some time. So I want to stop there for a minute because I was having a conversation with my son's teacher today. And good or bad, whether you agree or don't agree, I have always found it helpful for my son's teachers to know that he was brought into our family through adoption and that he is the son of a single mom. I just think it helps for me, his teachers and the people that he's working with understand him a little bit more. So I was talking to his teacher today and I was talking to him a little bit about identity. And within the conversation, I said, it came up that, oh, it probably gets easier as they get older. And I said, in fact, and after reading this especially, I said, in fact, I think it might get harder. I think it might get harder because of what Nancy is saying in this book, that it's such a complex, adoption is so complex with so many layers, that as you get older, you start to understand that more, and you start to internalize your story more, and understand all the pieces, or maybe have more questions that, and feel more feelings as a result. And so I actually think it gets a little bit more difficult as our children get older. It's crucial not to lie and to bring the ideas naturally into the conversation. I'm not reading, I'm just kind of skipping around. He should be free to discuss adoption all his life because it's a lifelong process. And it goes without saying, this came up in a conversation too. It goes without saying that the parents should be the ones to tell. They should at the same time convey love, honesty, and permanency, which doesn't mean that the child will be able to accept it that way. So that's interesting too. And obviously I'm not going to get through everything I underlined, but so last month's theme was the adoptee's voice. In our client community, we had a Zoom call where we had some of our clients who are adopting, who are also adoptees, come on and share some of their story. One person was sharing about how she didn't know about her adoption until she was 7, and that was only because so many other people knew and started telling her parents, you really should tell your child before, one of us do by accident, or before she hears it from somebody else. So it seems so like, duh, what do you mean it should come from the parent? It should come from the parent. And be careful about how you talk to other people about your child, because once it's out there, you cannot take it back. So make sure if you're talking about it, it's something that you will be absolutely comfortable with because your child is. So the goals are both telling and understanding, and both must be completed. Sometimes adoptees appear to be disinterested. This was good. Sometimes adoptees appear to be disinterested in their adoption. This is a defense. They are very interested. So interesting. I have an adult friend who is an adoptee, and I have tried to kind of dissect that with him, and he's like, I'm good. I don't need to know. I'm good. I've always been good, and I've always had my suspicions. But okay, and then she kind of goes on to break up what to say when, and I'll go into just the beginning parts because I think it's interesting. First 3 years, the explanation should be kept simple. The child may believe that everyone is adopted. In kindergarten, the child knows that he did not grow in the adoptive mother's womb. Differences between him and his parents are all right. It's a weird sentence. She said transracial, etc. So they're noticing differences if it's a transracial adoption between him and his parents. The child may want to see where he came from, so showing them the agency of the hospital, which makes a lot of sense. I actually recently did this, took my son to the hospital he was born in, and he was really interested in that. So that was cool. And it's not in the same state that we lived. He may need answers to other questions like, where did you get that red hair? And then she said, answer, from my family. So they might be getting questions starting in kindergarten from other people that are simple questions, and like, what are their answers, right? So just in kindergarten, it's simple, from my family, right? But it gets a little bit more complex as they get older. I'm going to stop there, but it's interesting, and I recommend this book. I haven't read any of the others that were suggested. Maybe I will. I find it fascinating. Like I said, it was hard to get into, but now that I'm into it, especially at the place where it's like, okay, now what do I do with all this information? I've really found it interesting, and I'm like, yes, hit the nail on the head. So lots and lots of ahas. Thank you. And as always, if you have any questions around domestic infant adoption, which is what we specialize in, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. Have a wonderful weekend. Signing off until next time. Bye, everybody.